1,251 people live in rented accommodation in Harleston. That number surprised you, didn't it? With the general election done, I thought it time to reflect on renting in the manifestos and party political broadcasts and ask why. As the best way to tell the future is to look at the past, so we decided to look at the number of people who rented a century ago, i.e. 1920s, would you believe? And surprisingly, 76% of people rented their home in the UK, as renting then was the considered norm. Yet in the latter part of the 1920s, builders of the suburban housing estates with their bay-fronted semis started to sell the dream of home ownership to smart renters. Up until the mid-1920s, the mortgage had been seen as a millstone around your neck. Now, due to some clever marketing by those same builders, it was started to be seen as a shrewd long-term investment to buy your home with a mortgage. It fueled the ambitions and goals of the up-and-coming well-to-do working class, who reclassed themselves as lower middle class. Meanwhile, the government encouraged, through tax breaks, people to save in building societies, whom in turn lent the money to those up-and-coming new homeowners through mortgages. Roll the clock forward to the decade of the young Elvis, Chuck Berry and Bill Haley, which was the 1950s, and still some 72% of Brits rented their home. Home ownership had boomed in the preceding 30 years, yet so had council house building. Then, as we entered the 1960s and 1970s, home ownership started to grow at a higher rate than council housing. The rate of home ownership started to drop substantially after the mid-1990s, and now we roll the clock forward to today and there is no stigma at all to renting. Everyone's doing it. In fact, of the 4,428 residents of Harleston, 1,251 of you rent your house from either the council, housing association or private landlords, meaning that 28.3% of Harleston people are tenants. Yet read the Daily Mail and you would think the idea of home ownership is deeply embedded in the British soul. 2,982 Harleston people live in an owner-occupied property, or 67.3%. So we have a paradox: homeowners or renters. The reason I suggest this is I noticed on the run-up to the election that housing was used at the general election as a way to get votes. This is nothing new, as all parties have always used housing to get votes, although previously it was about which party would build more council houses in the 1950s through to council right to buy with Thatcher and everything since, or everyone since. Running election campaigns promising everybody their own way, their own home in one way or another. Yet, did you notice at this election something changed? The parties weren't talking so much about increasing home ownership, but about protecting the tenant. It seems the link between home ownership as the main goal of British life is starting to change as we are slowly turning to a more European way of living. Renting is here to stay in Harleston and incrementally growing year on year. You see, in Britain there is no property tax based on ownership, which many other Western countries have. Instead, council tax is paid by the occupier of the home, meaning the tenant pays not necessarily the owner. Both parties wanted to end no-fault evictions, which is a good thing, yet Labour went further and mentioned rent controls in their manifesto. And as I have mentioned before in other articles on the Harleston Property Market, rents since 2008 and even in central London have not kept up with inflation. So again, was that another headline to grab votes? An election bribe? The fact is, the majority of new British households formed since the millennium can now expect to rent from a private landlord for life. Therefore, the parties focus on this important demographic. Yet even with the new mortgage relief tax rules for landlords and the 200 plus legislation that govern the private rental sector, buy-to-let is still a viable investment option for most investors in Harleston. There has never been a better time to purchase a buy-to-let property in Harleston, but buy wisely. Gone are the days when you would make a profit on anything with 4 walls and a roof. Most importantly, do your homework, take advice and consider your options. Well, that's about all for today. I hope that's been of use to you. If you need any help, please do let me know, and look forward to speaking to you soon.